It is 6:36 p.m. on March 27, 2023. I'm reading V.I. Lenin, The State and Revolution, and we'll resume Section 5. 1891 Preface to Marx's The Civil War in France. In his preface to the third edition of The Civil War in France, this preface is dated March 18, 1891, and is originally published in the Neue Zeit. Engels, in addition to some interesting incidental remarks on questions connected with attitudes toward the state, gives a remarkably vivid summary of the lesson of the Commune. This summary, rendered more profound by the entire experience of the 20 years that separated the author from the Commune, and directed particularly against the superstitious belief in the state so widespread in Germany, may justly be called the last word of Marxism on the question under consideration. Quote, in France, Engels observes, the workers emerged with arms from every revolution. Therefore, the disarming of the workers was the first commandment for the bourgeoisie who were at the helm of the state. Hence, after every revolution won by the workers, a new struggle, ending with the defeat of the workers. End quote. This summary of the experience of the bourgeois revolutions is as concise as it is expressive. The essence of the matter, also, by the way, on the question of the state, has the oppressed class arms, is here remarkably well grasped. It is precisely this essence of the matter which is most often ignored by professors who are influenced in bourgeois ideology and by petty bourgeois Democrats. In the Russian Revolution of 1917, the honor, not honor, of blabbing the secret of bourgeois revolutions fell to the Menshevik, also Marxist, Tseretelli. In his historic speech of June 11, Tseretelli blurted out that the bourgeoisie was determined to disarm the Petrograd workers, presenting, of course, this decision as his own and as a matter of necessity for the state in general. Tseretelli's historic speech of June 11th will, of course, serve every historian of the Revolution of 1917 as one of the most striking illustrations of how the Socialist Revolutionary and Menshevik bloc, led by Mr. Tseretelli, deserted to the bourgeoisie against the revolutionary proletariat. Another incidental remark of Engels, also connected with the question of the state, deals with religion. It is well known that German social democracy, as it decayed and became more and more opportunist, slipped more and more frequently into the Philistine misinterpretation of the celebrated formula. Quote, religion is to be proclaimed a private matter, end quote. That is, this formula was twisted to mean that religion was a private matter even for the party of the revolutionary proletariat. It was against this utter betrayal of the revolutionary program of the proletariat that Engels vigorously protested. In 1891, he saw only the very feeble beginnings of opportunism in his party, and therefore he expressed himself extremely cautiously. Quote, as almost only workers, or recognized representatives of the workers, sat in the Commune, its decisions bore a decidedly proletarian character. Either these decisions decreed reforms which the Republican bourgeoisie had failed to pass solely out of cowardice, but which provided a necessary basis for the free activity of the working class, such as the realization of the principle that in relation to the state, religion is a purely private matter, or the Commune promulgated decrees which were in the direct interest of the working class and in part cut deeply into the old order of society, end quote. Engels deliberately underlined the words in relation to the state as a straight thrust at the German opportunism, which had declared religion to be a private matter in relation to the party, thus degrading the party of the revolutionary proletariat to the level of the most vulgar, free-thinking Philistinism, which is prepared to allow a non-denominational status, but which renounces the party struggle against the opium of religion which stupefies the people. The future historian of German social democracy, in tracing the root causes of its shameful bankruptcy in 1914, will find a good amount of interesting material on this question, beginning with the evasive declarations in the articles of the party's ideological leader Kautsky, which open wide the door of opportunism, and ending with the attitude of the party towards the Los von Kirche Bewegung, the Leave the Church movement, in 1913. But let us see how, 20 years after the Commune, Engels summed up its lessons for the fighting proletariat. Here are the lessons to which Engels attached prime importance. Quote, it was precisely the oppressing power of the former centralized government, army, political police, bureaucracy, which Napoleon had created in 1798, and which since then had been taken over by every new government as a welcome instrument and used against its opponents. It was precisely this power which was to fail everywhere, just as it had already fallen in Paris. From the very outset, the Commune was compelled to recognize that the working class, once come to power, could not go on managing with the old state machine. And in order to lose again, it only just conquered supremacy. This working class must, on the one hand, do away with all the old repressive machinery previously used against itself, and on the other, safeguard itself against its own deputies and officials by declaring them all, without exception, subject to recall at any moment. End quote. Engels emphasizes again and again that not only under a monarchy, but also in the democratic republic, the state remains a state, i.e., it retains its fundamental characteristic feature of transforming the officials, the servants of society, its organs, into the masters of society. Quote, against this transformation of the state and the organs of the state from servants of society into masters of society, an inevitable transformation in all previous states, the Commune made use of two infallible means. In the first place, it filled all posts, administrative, judicial, and educational, by election on the basis of universal suffrage of all concerned, subject to the right of recall at any time by the same electors. And in the second place, all officials, high or low, were paid only the wages received by other workers. The highest salary paid by the Commune to anyone was 6,000 francs. In this way, an effective barrier to place hunting and careerism was set up, even apart from the blinding mandates to delegates to representative bodies, which were added besides. End quote. Engels here approaches the interesting boundary line at which consistent democracy, on the one hand, is transformed into socialism, and on the other hand, demands socialism. For in order to abolish the state, the functions of the civil service must be converted into the simple operations of control and accounting that are within the capacity and ability of the vast majority of the population, and subsequently of every single individual. And in order to abolish careerism completely, it must be made impossible for honorable, though profitless posts in the public service to be used as a springboard to highly lucrative posts in banks or joint stock companies, as constantly happens in all the freest capitalist countries. But Engels did not make the mistake some Marxists make in dealing, for example, with the question of the right of nations to self-determination, when they argue that this is impossible under capitalism and will be superfluous under socialism. Such a seemingly clever but actually incorrect statement might be made in regard to any democratic institution, including moderate salaries for officials, because fully consistent democracy is impossible under capitalism, and under socialism, all democracy withers away. It is a sophistry like the old joke as to whether a man will become bald if he loses one more hair. To develop democracy to the utmost, to seek out the forms for this development, to test them by practice and so forth, all this is one of the constituent tasks of the struggle for the social revolution. Taken separately, no kind of democracy will bring socialism. But in actual life, democracy will never be taken separately. It will be taken together with other things. It will exert its influence on economic life, will stimulate its transformation, and in its turn, it will be influenced by economic development, and so on. Such are the dialectics of living history. Engels continues, quote, this shattering, Sprengung, of the former state power and its replacement by a new and truly democratic one is described in detail in the third section of the Civil War. But it was necessary to dwell briefly here once more on some of its features, because in Germany, particularly, the superstitious belief in the state has been carried over from philosophy into the general consciousness of the bourgeoisie and even of many workers. According to the philosophical conception, the state is the realization of the idea, or the kingdom of God on earth, translated into philosophical terms, the sphere in which eternal truth and justice is or should be realized. And from this follows a superstitious reverence for the state and everything connected with it, which takes roots the more readily since people are accustomed from childhood to imagine that the affairs and interests common to the whole of society could not be looked after otherwise than as they have been looked after in the past. that is, through the state and its lucratively positioned officials. And people think they have taken quite an extraordinarily bold step forward when they have rid themselves of belief in hereditary monarchy and swear by the democratic republic. In reality, however, the state is nothing but a machine for the oppression of one class by another. And indeed, the democratic republic are no less than in the monarchy, and at best an evil inherited by the proletariat after its victorious struggle for class supremacy, whose worst sides the victorious proletariat, just like the commune, cannot avoid having to lop off at once as much as possible until such time as a generation reared in a new, free social conditions is able to throw the entire lumber of the state on the scrap heap. End quote. Engels warned the Germans not to forget the fundamentals of socialism and the question of the state in general in connection with the substitution of a republic for the monarchy. His warnings now read like a veritable lesson to the Messrs. Tseretellis and Chernovs, who in their coalition practice here revealed a superstitious belief in and a superstitious reference for the state. Two more remarks. The fact that Engels said that in a democratic republic, no less than in a monarchy, the state remains a machine for the oppression of one class by another, by no means signifies that the form of oppression is a matter of indifference to the proletariat, as some anarchists teach. A wider, freer, and more open form of the class struggle and of class oppression enormously assists the proletariat in its struggle for the abolition of classes in general. 2. Why will only a new generation be able to throw the entire lumber of the state on the scrap heap? This question is bound up with that of overcoming democracy, with which we shall deal now. 6. Engels on the overcoming of democracy. Engels had occasion to express his views on this subject in connection with the fact that the term social democrat was scientifically wrong. In a preface to an edition of his articles of the 70s on various subjects, mainly on international questions, Internationales aus dem Werkstatt, dated January 3, 1894, i.e., written a year and a half before his death, Engels wrote that in all of his articles he used the word communist and not social democrat, because at that time the Proudhonists in France and the Lassallians in Germany called themselves social democrats. Quote, "For Marx and me," continues Engels, "it was therefore absolutely impossible to use such an elastic term to characterize our point of view. Today things are different, and the word social democrat may perhaps pass muster, mag passieren, however inexact, unpassend, unsuitable. It still is for a party whose economic program is not merely socialist in general, but directly communist, and whose ultimate political aim is to overcome the whole state and consequently democracy as well. The names of real political parties, however, are never wholly appropriate. The party develops while the name stays." End quote. The dialectician Engels remains true to dialectics to the end of his days. Marx and I, he said, had a splendid, scientifically exact name for the party, but there was no real party, i.e., no mass proletarian party. Now, at the end of the 19th century, there is a real party, but its name is scientifically inexact. Never mind, it will pass muster if only the party develops, if only the scientific inexactness of its name is not hidden from it and does not hinder its development in the right direction. Perhaps some wit would console us Bolsheviks in the manner of Engels. We have a real party. It is developing splendidly. Even such a meaningless and ugly term as Bolshevik will pass muster, although it expresses nothing whatever but the purely accidental fact that at the Brussels-London Congress 1903, we were in the majority. Perhaps now that the persecution of our party by Republicans and revolutionary petty bourgeois democracy in July and August has earned the name Bolshevik such a universal respect, now that, in addition, this persecution attests to the tremendous historical progress of our party has made in its real development. Perhaps now even I might hesitate to insist on the suggestion I made in April to change the name of our party. Perhaps I would propose a compromise to my comrades V's to call ourselves the Communist Party, but to retain the word Bolshevik in brackets. But the question of the name of the party is incomparably less important than the question of the attitude of the revolutionary proletariat to the state. In the usual arguments about the state, The mistake is constantly made against which Engels uttered his warning, and which we have in passing indicated above. Namely, it is constantly forgotten that the abolition of the state means also the abolition of democracy, that the withering away of the state means the withering away of democracy. At first sight, this assertion seems exceedingly strange and incomprehensible. Indeed, someone may even begin to fear that we are expecting the advent of an order of society in which the principle of the subordination of the minority to the majority will not be observed, for democracy means the recognition of just this principle. No, democracy is not identical with the subordination of the minority to the majority. Democracy is a state which recognizes the subordination of the minority to the majority, i.e., an organization for the systematic use of violence by one class against the other, by one section of the population against another. We set ourselves the ultimate aim of abolishing the state, i.e., all organized and systematic violence, all use of violence against man in general. We do not expect the advent of an order of society in which the principle of the subordination of the minority to the majority will not be observed. But, striving for socialism, we are convinced that it will develop into communism and, hence, that the need for violence against people in general, for the subordination of one man to another and of one section of the population to another, will vanish altogether, since people will become accustomed to observing the elementary conditions of social life without violence and without subordination. In order to emphasize this element of habit, Engels speaks of a new generation, reared in new and free social conditions, which will be able to throw on the scrap heap the entire lumber of the state, of every kind of state, including the democratic Republican state. In order to explain this, it is necessary to examine the question of the economic basis of the withering away of the state. Concluded at the bottom of page 100.